Today we are going to talk about fermentation. Fermentation, which is an anaerobic harvesting of energy. Now, we talked about the last couple of days, we talked about the aerobic harvesting of energy. Now we are talking about the anaerobic harvesting of energy. Who can tell me, ladies and gentlemen, what the difference is? Fletcher? Aerobic requires oxygen. When we have the lack thereof oxygen, it enters into this anaerobic harvesting of energy. Now, we're different than a lot of things because we're aerobic. We make through cellular respiration, we get our energy from an aerobic cycle. But we can also get some energy from anaerobic cycles. Okay? We can get anaerobic energy too. Now, it is not nearly as much. Okay? Not nearly as much energy, but we can do it. There are some organisms that, number one, some just are, they don't like oxygen at all. It'll kill them. Okay? Some organisms, like ones at the bottom of the ocean, there's no oxygen down there, but there's a lot of sulfur. So they undergo this anaerobic respiration, or this anaerobic harvesting of energy, because they use sulfur instead of oxygen. Now, in fermentation, okay, fermentation enables the cells to produce ATP without oxygen. So the key thing, it is anaerobic. It is anaerobic, so it allows them to produce ATP without oxygen. And that, that's just restating it here, okay? Restating it here. I don't think this is even in your notes, but fermentation is a way of harvesting chemical energy that does not require oxygen. Fermentation takes advantage of glycolysis. What was glycolysis, people? What was glycolysis? You remember? It was the first stage of cellular respiration, right? Go back and look at your glycolysis notes. It should be on the page before, right? Or 2 pages before. What can you tell me about glycolysis? Where does it occur at? Maddie? Occurs in the cytoplasm. What else? Okay. What else can you tell me about glycolysis? Kayla? Occurs in the cytoplasm. What else? It's the first step. It begins cellular respiration. What's the third thing, Dylan? Third thing glycolysis does. Yeah, you do. Read your notes. What's the third thing it does? Breaks down glucose into a 3-carbon molecule, right? A 3-carbon molecule. Folks, what we need to do is we need to start utilizing our interactive notebook. Okay, the stuff is in there. We need to be able to go back and pull that stuff out. You're going to have a test coming up next week. I can tell you that. You're going to have a cell process test coming up next week where you're going to have to be able to pull stuff out of there from your mind. Okay, so you're going to have to be reviewing that. Getting back to fermentation, takes advantage of glycolysis. Okay? It produces 2 ATP per molecule of glucose. It also reduces NAD plus to NADH. Okay? It reduces NAD plus to NADH. The trick of fermentation is to provide an anaerobic recycling of NADH back to NAD+. That is the trick, to provide an anaerobic path for the recycling of NADH. Your muscle cells and certain bacteria oxidize NADH through lactic acid fermentation. Lactic acid fermentation. Now, why do they call it lactic acid fermentation? Well, you look at that second line there. Pyruvate is reduced to lactate. So, once glycolysis happens, okay, once glycolysis happens, if you remember on, okay, that we have formed this 3-carbon molecule that we call pyruvate. Well, the glycolysis occurs, the pyruvate then is reduced to lactate. Now, if you remember, if oxygen is present, we continue on with cellular respiration. So we would go from stage 1 to stage 2, which is the Krebs cycle, the citric acid cycle. Then we would go to stage 3. If we don't have oxygen present, we go into fermentation. One type here that we undergo is what we call lactic acid fermentation. The pyruvate that was made in glycolysis is then reduced to lactate. Well, what is lactate? It is carried by the blood to the liver. It's carried by the blood to the liver, where it is converted back to pyruvate and oxidized in the mitochondria of the liver cells. The dairy industry uses lactic acid fermentation. Okay? What happens is bacteria makes cheese and yogurt. Anybody like yogurt? I like certain types. I'm not real big on this Greek yogurt stuff. Okay? But I like certain types of yogurt. I like cheese. Okay? Well, if we didn't have this lactic acid fermentation, we wouldn't have those things, because that's how bacteria is used to make that. Other types of microbial fermentation: soybeans, turning soybeans into soy sauce, turning cabbage into sauerkraut. Anybody like sauerkraut? I like sauerkraut. You know, the whole deal, isn't it? What is it? It's supposed to be good luck if you eat sauerkraut on New Year's Day. You're supposed to have a good year. If you eat sauerkraut, I think that's what it is. If you eat sauerkraut on New Year's Day, you're supposed to have a good year. So a lot of times, if you go to New Year's Eve party somewhere, they might have sauerkraut and sausage. So when, you know, that clock strikes midnight, you eat the sauerkraut, you're going to have a good year. Okay? You're going to have a good year. But I like sauerkraut. So thank goodness we have fermentation, you know. Cheese, sauerkraut, yogurt. I can live without soy sauce. I can live without soy sauce. A second type of fermentation is what we call alcohol fermentation. Alcohol fermentation. Okay, the baking and wine making industries have used alcohol fermentation for thousands of years. In this process, the pyruvate, once again, here we go. That pyruvate is converted into carbon dioxide and a substance called ethanol. Ethanol is ethyl alcohol. Okay, so yeast convert the pyruvate to carbon dioxide and ethyl alcohol. Where around here have we heard about ethanol? Any ideas? Brittany? A medicine? I wasn't thinking medicine so much. Huh? From cows? I would think you would be thinking of some kind of other gas that cows release. Okay? Ethanol. Have you ever heard, there's a big one. Anybody ever drive up to Lima on I-75? On the left of the road there's a big ethanol plant. Okay? They're taking the corn that's grown and they're making ethanol, which is, they're using it as a fuel for like cars. Okay? A fuel for like cars. So there's ethanol plants around here. So we have that. Okay? We have that. The pyruvate is converted to carbon dioxide and ethanol. We got a lot of corn around here, don't we? All right. That's why it's a good place for that. Long ago, there was talks about building an ethanol plant just west of town, or it'd be west of town. No, it'd be east of town. Okay? There was talks that they were going to build an ethanol plant east of town here, but they kind of fizzled out. Okay? I don't even know if that ethanol plant on I-75 is even running. I don't even know if they're making ethanol there or not. Now, the connections. The connections between the metabolic pathways. So this is page 74 here in our interactive notebook. The connections between the metabolic pathways. Cells use many kind of organic molecules as fuel for cellular respiration. Okay? Cells will use many kind of organic molecules as fuels for cellular respiration. Although glucose, remember that guy? Glucose is considered to be the primary source of sugars for respiration and fermentation. ATP is also generated using, where's my drum roll? Carbohydrates. fats, and proteins. Have you ever heard of those things? Okay. Carbohydrates. Well, glucose is a carbohydrate, isn't it? And glucose is sugar, so it's a carbohydrate, so we're meaning other types of carbohydrates. Okay? Fats, proteins. I'm going to let you in on a little thing here, folks. The next, so to speak, unit after cellular respiration, once we start back from our Thanksgiving break, our next unit is going to be macromolecules. You know what 3 of the things we're going to talk about in macromolecules are? Carbohydrates. The second one is fats, which we'll be calling lipids. Okay? And then we'll talk about proteins. We're going to add another one in, nucleic acids. So, macromolecules we're going to discuss after this chapter. Okay, so we'll go more in depth on that. So, basically, what we're trying to get across here is glucose the only source that fuels this cellular respiration? No. Okay? No. We can also generate ATP using other carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. Fats. Okay? Fats make an excellent cellular fuel. Why? Why do fats make an excellent cellular fuel? All right. Yeah, so fats, excellent for fuel because they contain many hydrogen atoms, thus they have many energy-rich electrons. Okay? They have many hydrogen atoms. Now, if you remember, what's the whole thing that kicks out a huge amount of ATP? That third stage, which was called what? What was our third stage of cellular respiration? Huh? Oxidative phosphorylation, which had in it what? The ETC, which is what? The electron ETC, electron, transport chain. I told you to even write ETC up by it, didn't I? Okay. So, the electron transport chain. Fats are good because they have a lot of electrons, because they have a lot of these hydrogens. They yield more than twice as much ATP per gram than a gram of a carbohydrate or a protein. More than twice as much ATP per gram. Now, here's a little diagram, okay? Here's a little diagram. We don't need to write this down, okay? But it's just relating how. You know, we have over here carbohydrates, the sugar, the glucose, okay? The glycolysis, the pyruvate, you know, oxidation into acetyl-CoA, citric acid, oxidative phosphorylation. All those things should be sounding familiar now to you, shouldn't they? All parts of cellular respiration.